He named a price meant to make her run. She didn't flinch. Now the bluff has teeth, and behind every locked door in this house waits the one thing neither dared to want. Our story begins now. The owl had come at dusk, which was how Draco knew it was serious. Granger did not send messages by daylight anymore. Daylight was for the version of the world that watched her, that clapped when she spoke, that printed her face beside words like conscience and rebuilding. The night belonged to the other Hermione Granger, the one who wanted things she could not ask for in front of an audience. He had learned that much about her in 2 years of near silence, and he despised how much he had learned. The parchment lay on his desk now, one line in her upright hand. I need to see you. It concerns my mother's brother. You have something I need. He read it 4 times, not because he failed to understand it, but because understanding it required admitting she had found the one lever in the house that could still move him. The fact that the Malfoys hoarded knowledge the way other families hoarded gold, and that somewhere in the Black Library beneath the West Wing sat a thing she believed could save a life. He was standing at the window when the ward sighed and told him she had crossed the gate. She came up the drive on foot through a thin, needling rain, no umbrella, her coat darkening at the shoulders. He watched her the whole way and refused to go down until the knocker had fallen twice, because a man who came running was a man already losing. When he opened the door, the cold came in with her, and under it the smell of wet wool and ozone. She had apparated to the lane and walked the rest, and the residue of the jump still clung to her like the air after lightning. Her hair had given up its shape entirely. A curl was pasted to her cheekbone. She did not brush it away. Malfoy. Granger. He did not step aside. He let the doorframe hold her out in the rain 1 heartbeat longer than courtesy allowed, and he saw her jaw tighten and something ugly and warm turned over in his chest at the sight. You walk to houses you're afraid of. Interesting. I'm not afraid of your house. No, he said. You're afraid of what you're about to ask me for. Come in before you ruin my floor. She came in. The entrance hall swallowed her. The vaulted dark, the single chandelier he never bothered to fully light anymore, the long stretch of marble where, once, in another life, things had happened that neither of them named. He saw her eyes flick to the center of that floor and away. He felt the old scene rise between them like damp off stone and forced it down. Say it, he said. Whatever it is, you clearly rehearsed. The muscle in her cheek flickered. She had rehearsed. Of course she had. She reached up and adjusted the collar of her sodden coat, a small, precise tug, entirely unnecessary, the gesture of a woman buying herself 1 second more. My uncle, she said. My mother's brother. He was hit during the war, not killed, cursed. A slow one. The healers at St. Mungo's don't recognize the working. It's old. It's blood old. Her chin came up. The kind of magic your family kept records of when everyone else was too decent to write it down. And you want to read our indecency. I want to save a man's life. Same thing, in this house. He walked past her, slow, so she had to turn to keep him in view, so she became the one adjusting to him. You could have written to the ministry, requisitioned it, sent auras to seize what the disgraced Malfoys are surely hiding. Why the wet coat, Granger? Why the personal visit in the dark? Her silence had a texture to it. He turned to face her and watched her weigh whether to lie. "Because a requisition takes months," she said finally, "and he doesn't have months. And because the sealed archive answers to Malfoy blood, Aurors could carry the whole West Wing out brick by brick and never open it. A breath. I need you to open it, willingly. There's no other way." There it was, the thing he had suspected and dreaded, that she needed not his books, but him, his hand on the seal, his consent, that she had come to beg, and that she would rather have walked into 100 storms than say the word please to Draco Malfoy. And he understood, standing there with rain ticking off her hem onto his marble, exactly how much power he had been handed. It sat in his palm, cold and complete. He could give her the thing that mattered most in the world to her, and she would owe him for the rest of both their lives. And every time she looked at him afterward, there would be that debt in her eyes, softening them. He did not want her softened. That was the truth he could not afford. He wanted her at a distance where she stayed sharp, stayed Granger, stayed the girl who had every right to hate him, and did the courtesy of using it. If she came closer than that, if the war between them ever went quiet, he did not know what would be left of him underneath. So he did what a cornered man does. He named a price so grotesque she would have to leave. "All right," he said. Her eyes came up, wary at the ease of it. "You can have the archive. My blood, my hand, the whole indecent library, on one condition." He let the pause draw out until it hummed. 24 hours. You give me a full day, and for those 24 hours, he heard his own voice go quiet and cruel, heard it from somewhere outside himself. "I do whatever I want with you." The rain filled the silence. Somewhere far off in the house, a beam settled with a sound like a held breath released. He waited for the flinch. He had built the sentence to produce it. The widening eyes, the flush of insult, the "how dare you" that would send her back into the storm with her chin high and her uncle doomed and Draco safely, wretchedly alone. He had said the cruelest thing he could reach for precisely so she would refuse it. That was the entire architecture of the bluff. Repel her, make her hate him cleanly, keep the distance he could survive. She did not flinch. She looked at him, really looked, the way she looked at a locked thing she intended to open. And he watched her understand the trap and see straight through the floor of it to the fear he had hidden under the cruelty. He watched her read him, and the humiliation of being read was worse than any slap. "Whatever you want," she repeated, flat, testing the weight of it. "You heard me. Define it." "I won't." "Then I'll assume the worst of you," she said, "which shouldn't be difficult. You always have. Why stop now?" He wanted her to spit at him. He wanted the fury. What he got instead was worse. A stillness, a settling, the visible moment a person stops calculating whether to jump and simply jumps. "Fine." The word landed in him like cold water down the spine. "Granger, you said 24 hours. Whatever you want, in exchange for the archive." She unbuttoned her ruined coat with hands that were not quite steady and folded it over her arm, and the domestic ordinariness of it, a guest making herself at home in the house of her nightmares, undid something in his chest. "I accept. When do we start?" He had miscalculated. He understood that now with a lurching completeness, the way you understand you've stepped off a stair that isn't there. He had built a wall of the ugliest brick he owned, and she had simply walked up and made it a door. He should take it back. That was the intelligent move. Laugh, call it a jest in poor taste, hand her the books out of nothing but the desire to see her gone. But taking it back meant admitting the bluff. Admitting the bluff meant admitting why. That he had reached for cruelty because tenderness terrified him. That the price had never been about using her and always about frightening himself away from her. And Draco Malfoy would sooner drink the cursed working himself than let Hermione Granger see that far into him twice in one night. Now, he heard himself say, we start now. Something crossed her face. Not triumph. He had braced for triumph and could have withstood it. This was closer to relief, and threaded through the relief, so faint he might have imagined it, a thing that was almost anticipation, as though some part of her had come here wanting to be told she couldn't leave. Now, she agreed. He should have felt like the one holding the leash. He had set the terms. The day was his. Every hour of it belonged to whatever he decided to want. And yet, as she stood there, dripping in his hall, having called his bluff so completely that it had folded around them both like a snare drawn tight, he understood with perfect clarity who had walked into whose trap. He had thought he was building a wall to keep her out. He had built a room with no door but the one behind her, and shut them both inside it, and thrown away 24 hours of every defense he owned. Then, take off your shoes, he said, because he needed to give an order, any order, to remember he was supposed to be the one in charge. You're not tracking half of Wiltshire through my house. She bent to unlace them without a word, and he stood over her in the dim gold light with his heart going like a hunted thing, and understood that the duel had already begun, and that he had lost the first hour before the clock had even started to count. Her shoes came off and she straightened, and for a moment they simply stood there. She in her stocking feet on the cold marble, he in his own house feeling like the trespasser. The rain had followed her in as sound. He could hear it against the tall windows, patient and endless, the kind of Wiltshire rain that did not fall so much as settle, soaking the fields to black. There are rules, he said, because a man drowning reaches for structure. You wanted them defined. I'll define this much. You don't leave the grounds. You don't lie to me. Not for the whole day, not once. And when I tell you to do a thing, you do it, or the bargain's void, and you walk back out into that with nothing. He tipped his head toward the streaming glass. Those are the terms. And in exchange, the archive. In exchange, the archive. At the end, not before. He watched that land. You'll have to trust that I'll keep my word, Granger. I imagine that's the part costing you the most. You imagine correctly. Say it then, out loud, that you agree. She looked at him with those steady brown eyes that had faced down worse men than him in worse rooms, and he understood she was going to make him regret asking for the words, because she gave them to him without a flicker. I agree. 24 hours. Whatever you want. A pause, deliberate, a blade slid in flat. I hope it's worth as much to you as you're pretending. He turned away before his face could answer her. He led her deeper into the house, and the manor did the thing it always did to visitors. it listened. He had grown up under that listening and stopped hearing it, but he heard it now through her, felt the way the long galleries held their breath as she passed, the portraits going still in their frames, the chandeliers dimming a half shade as though the whole structure had turned to watch the war heroine walk its bones. She kept her spine straight. He gave her that. Whatever the house did to her insides, she did not let it reach her shoulders. "You've been here before," he said. It was not a kind thing to say, and he knew it as it left him. "Once. I remember. I know you do." She did not look at the drawing-room doors as they passed them. The refusal to look was louder than looking would have been. A whole history compressed into the careful neutrality of her profile, the muscle ticking once at the corner of her jaw and going still. He had been in that room too, that night, on the wrong side of it, and doing nothing, and the not doing sat in him now the way it always did, a stone swallowed whole. He did not offer her the apology. Apologies were words, and words were cheap, and she of all people would know the difference between a sentence and a change. Instead, he opened a different door, the small east parlour, where his mother used to take tea when the light was good, warmer than the rest of the house, the one room he still lived in. A fire had already caught in the grate. He'd set it before she arrived, an admission he chose not to examine. 2 chairs, a low table, rain on this window too, but softer here, gentled by the ivy that had grown up the wall outside since no one tended it any more. "Sit," he said. "Is that a want or a courtesy? Does it matter? You said whatever you want for 24 hours. I'd like to know when it starts counting." Clever. She was going to hold him to the shape of his own trap, make him spend his terrible power out loud, force him to choose the cruelties one by one, where he could see his own hand doing it. She had understood, faster than he had, that the bargain punished the one who set it. Every order he gave would be a thing he'd had to want, named and owned in front of her. She had turned his leash into a mirror. "It started when you took your shoes off," he said. "Sit down, Granger." She sat. He remained standing because the height was the only advantage left to him, and he was not above using it. The fire threw its unsteady gold across her, caught the drying frizz of her hair, the pale line of her throat where the collar had fallen open. He looked at her too long. He knew he looked too long. He saw her see it, and this was the thing that undid him, the thing he had not prepared for. She did not look away, and she did not arm herself. She simply let him look, and in the letting there was a challenge more disarming than any insult. "Go on then. Want something? Show me what you are." "You think I brought you here to humiliate you," he said. "Didn't you? I brought you here so you'd leave." The truth slipped out before he could stop it, and the room seemed to tilt around the admission. He turned to the fire so he wouldn't have to watch her catalogue it. "The price was meant to be too high," he went on, low, because now that one true thing had escaped, the rest wanted air. "You were supposed to be insulted, slap me, curse me, march back out into the rain hating me cleanly, the way you're entitled to. That was the entire point. And instead, you—" He stopped. His knuckles had gone white on the mantel. He watched them do it, the way a man watches something happen to someone else's hand. He made them loosen. "Instead, you called it. So now here we are. You in my mother's chair, Me not knowing what the hell I actually want, except to take back a sentence I can't take back. Silence, but a different silence than before. The earlier one had bristled. This one had weight, the density of a thing being decided. Then take it back, she said quietly. I can't. Why not? Because taking it back means telling you why I said it. He faced her, and I'd rather stand in a burning house than do that twice in one night. She was quiet for a long moment. The rain filled it. A log shifted in the grate and threw up a small storm of sparks, and in the flare of it, he saw her face clearly, not softened. He'd been so afraid of softened, but open, which was worse, which was infinitely more dangerous. The openness of someone recalibrating everything she'd walked in believing. You've spent 2 years making sure everyone kept their distance, she said slowly, as though reading it off him. Answering owls at night, never leaving this house, letting them all think you're exactly what they printed. Her head tilted. And the one time someone got close enough to actually cost you something, you built the worst wall you could find and dared her to climb it. A breath. You didn't think I'd climb it. No, he said. I didn't. Well. She settled deeper into the chair, and there was something almost gentle in the ruthlessness of it, the way a healer is gentle setting a bone. You've had 2 years of distance, Malfoy. You'll survive a day of the opposite. Give me an order, a real one. I'd like to know exactly how frightening the great Draco Malfoy's whatever I want actually is, now that he has to say it to my face. And there it was. She had walked all the way around behind him and put the mirror where he could not avoid it. Whatever he asked for now would tell her what he was. If he asked for cruelty, he was cruel. If he asked for nothing, he was afraid. And if he asked for the thing that had been rising in him since she'd stepped out of the rain, the thing with no name he was willing to give it, the pull toward her that lived under the 2 years of engineered distance, like a current under ice. Then he would be handing her the last true thing he had. He looked at her a long time. The clock on the mantel, his grandfather's clock, ozone-tarnished silver, ticking with a small mechanical patience of a thing that had counted down men before him, filled the room with its measure. Somewhere past the window, the rain went on erasing the world beyond the grounds, sealing them in. 2 people and a fire, and 23 hours and change. You're cold, he said at last. Not an order, an observation, an evasion, a coward's swerve. And yet the moment it was out, he understood it was going to become the first true instruction of the day, because he could not stand the sight of her damp and shivering in his mother's chair. Could not stand the small tremor she was suppressing in her wet shoulders, and the not standing it was itself a kind of confession. You walked through half a storm, and you're sitting there dripping and stubborn and pretending you're not freezing. That's my first want, Granger. Stop pretending. Let me warm you before you catch your death and rob me of the pleasure of the other 23 hours. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, and beneath it a wariness at the tenderness smuggled inside the sarcasm, because she'd braced for a blade and been handed a blanket, and she trusted the blanket less than she'd have trusted the blade. That's your terrifying want, she said. That I stop being cold. For now, she echoed, and the 2 small words hung there, weighted with everything the day still held. He crossed to the cabinet by the window and took out the folded wool throw his mother had left behind, the one that still, faintly, after all this time, carried the ghost of her perfume. And he brought it back to where Hermione Granger sat in the firelight of a house that had once nearly killed her. And he did the most dangerous thing he had done all night. He knelt. He knelt in front of her chair, and he draped the wool across her knees, and his hands. He watched them do it, betraying him, moving with a care he had not authorized, smoothed the fabric down over her legs, and for one suspended instant, his fingers rested there, feeling the cold coming off her damp skirt, the tremor in her running up into his own hands, and neither of them breathed, and the rain came down, and the whole enormous listening house went utterly and completely still around the two of them, kneeling and sitting in its heart, waiting to see which of them would be the first to move. He drew his hands back first. He would remember later that it was him, that some last century of self-preservation had made his fingers lift from her knees before hers could decide anything, before the tremor running between their skins could argue him into staying. He stood. The blood roared in his ears with the disproportionate violence of a man who had done nothing more scandalous than tuck a blanket over a cold woman's lap. "Better," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he'd built it to. "Marginally." But she pulled the wool closer, and he saw her fingers find the worn edge of it, and he saw the exact moment the scent reached her, because her brow drew together the smallest fraction. She was too clever not to know whose it had been. She said nothing. That, too, was a kind of mercy, and he was learning tonight that Hermione Granger's mercies cut deeper than most people's cruelties. He needed distance. He'd promised himself the whole day would be him holding the reins, and instead, he kept finding himself on his knees. So he walked to the far window and put the width of the room between them, and made himself remember the point of the exercise. To frighten her off had failed. Fine. Then the point became the second thing, the thing underneath, to prove to himself that this could be endured, that he could have her in his house alone for a full turn of the clock and come out the other side unchanged, distance intact, the current under the ice undisturbed. He simply had to not want her. It was a matter of discipline. He had been disciplined about wanting nothing for 2 years. One more day was arithmetic. "You're hungry," he said, not turning around. "You skipped supper to come frighten yourself on my doorstep. Don't argue. I can hear your stubbornness from here." Is that another want? It's a fact. The want is this. He turned. "Come to the kitchen. You'll eat something I put in front of you, and you won't ask what it is or where it came from or whether it's poisoned, and you'll trust me to feed you for 1 meal. That's the order." He watched her weigh it. He knew what the trust cost her, knew that of all the humiliations he could have devised, asking Hermione Granger to eat blind from a Malfoy hand in a Malfoy kitchen was the one that pressed hardest on the oldest bruise. He had chosen it half on instinct, and only understood as he said it that he was testing the same thing in her that he was failing to master in himself, whether the war could be set down for a single meal. "Fine," she said, and rose, the wool still around her shoulders like a stolen thing she'd decided to keep. "Lead on. Let's see if the Malfoys can cook or only complain." The kitchen was the one room in the house that had never learned to be grand. Below stairs, low-beamed, the great scrubbed table worn pale by generations of hands that had not been Malfoy hands. He had spent more of his boyhood here than he'd ever admitted to anyone, hiding from the drawing room and its long silences, learning from house elves who were kinder to him than his own blood. There were no elves now. He'd freed the last of them and let the house run half wild, and he cooked for himself like a muggle, and he had told no living soul, and he did not know why he was showing her. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her eyes went over the copper pans hung by his own hand, the crock of eggs, the bread he'd baked that morning going stale under a cloth, and he watched her rearrange her entire model of him in real time. Watch the war hero recalibrate around the sight of Draco Malfoy's flour-dusted apron on its hook. "You cook," she said. "I eat. Cooking is what happens on the way." He pulled out the bench for her. "Sit. Don't look at me like that." "Like what?" "Like you've caught me at something." He turned to the stove so she wouldn't see whatever was on his face. "It's bread and eggs and the last of a decent cheese, Granger, not a confession." But it was. That was the trouble with the whole cursed day. Everything was turning into a confession. Every ordinary act stripped down to its lining by the simple fact of being witnessed. He cracked eggs into a pan, and the small domestic violence of it steadied him. Behind him, he heard the bench take her weight, heard the wool settle, heard her go quiet in a way that was not hostile. The fat hissed. Rain drummed the high window at street level with the fields. For a while, neither of them spoke, and the silence changed character again. No longer a duel, not yet a truce, something rawer, the wordless quiet of two people sharing a small, warm room in a large, cold house while the world outside dissolved in water. He set the plate in front of her. Eggs, the good cheese melted through, bread he'd caught just before it burned. He put down a fork. Then, because the order had been to trust him, and because he could not help pushing the thing to its edge, he did not sit across from her. He sat beside her on the same long bench, close enough that the warmth of her came off her damp shoulder and met the warmth of his, and he watched her go still with the fork halfway up. "Eat," he said quietly, near enough that the word barely needed voice. She ate. He watched her do it, watched her taste it, watched the small betraying flicker of surprise that it was good, watched her decide not to give him the satisfaction of saying so, and the withholding made him want to laugh. An actual laugh. The first honest thing his chest had wanted to do in longer than he could name. He didn't. He sat beside her in the low gold light and did not touch his own food, and watched Hermione Granger eat bread he'd baked with his own disgraced hands, and understood with a sinking that felt strangely like relief that the arithmetic had been wrong from the start. This could not be endured unchanged. Every hour was changing him. He had known it since the drive. "Why him?" he said, when her plate was half gone and the silence had softened enough to hold a real question. "Your uncle. You've got the whole ministry that owes you its existence. You could have made anyone find another way. Why come here? Why bargain with me? Why sit in this kitchen letting me feed you, all for a man most of them have never heard you mention?" She set the fork down. She took her time. He'd learned that about her tonight too, that Granger's silences were never empty. They were heard drawing the water up before the well gave. Because he was the one who told me magic was real, she said finally. Before Hogwarts, before the letter, when I was small and did things I couldn't explain, and my parents looked at me like I was breaking, he was the one who sat me down and said, "There's more to the world than they've told you, Hermione, and none of it makes you wrong." Her voice did not waver, but her hand found the edge of the table and pressed there, the knuckles paling, the same tell he'd shown at the mantle and hated in himself. He's a muggle. He never had a drop of it, but he believed me before there was any proof, and he loved me for the thing that frightened everyone else. And the war took a curse meant for me and put it in him instead, because he stepped in front of it, because that's what he does. And now he's dying slowly in a bed at St. Mungo's, while men in lime green robes shrug, and I sit in Malfoy Manor eating your bread, because you people are the only ones who ever bothered to write down how to unmake what's killing him. She stopped. The pressure of her hand on the table eased. She looked at him, and there was no plea in it, only the bare fact of her laid on the scrubbed wood between them. That's why. Now you know. Don't waste it. He said nothing for a long moment, because there was nothing to say that would not be smaller than what she'd handed him. He thought of the drawing room. He thought of a curse that had gone into a man who'd never asked for magic, from a war Draco had helped make possible by his silence and his fear and his family's rotten pride. He did not say any of it. He'd told her already that apologies were cheap, and he'd meant it, and the only apology worth anything was the archive, which he was going to open regardless of the bargain, and had known he would since she'd named her uncle's blood. But the bargain was the thing keeping her here, and he understood, sitting on that bench with the rain coming down and her grief cooling on the table between them, that he was no longer willing to want her gone. The realization arrived without permission, the way the truth had at the mantle. Quiet, total, irreversible. "Finish eating," he said, and his voice had gone strange, gentled past his ability to correct it. "Then I have somewhere to take you. It's still my day. I still get to choose. And I choose to show you something no one's seen in this house since before the war." Her eyes came up, sharp with the question she was too proud to ask. "Not the archive," he said. "Not yet. Something else. Something that'll cost me more to show you than the books ever could." He stood and held out his hand. Palm up, open, the first time all night he had offered rather than commanded. And he watched her look at it, watched 2 years of everything hang in the space above his open hand, while the rain came down and the old clock upstairs counted off the hours neither of them was counting anymore. And he waited, for the first time in his life, to be chosen rather than obeyed. She took his hand. She did it without ceremony, the way she seemed to do everything that frightened her, quickly, before the fear could organize a defense. And her fingers closed around his, still cool from the rain, and the small warm shock of it went up his arm and lodged somewhere behind his sternum. He had offered his hand as a dare, half certain she'd refuse it to keep her pride intact. She had called that bluff too. He was going to have to stop making bets he could not afford to lose. He led her back up out of the kitchen's warmth and into the cold arteries of the house, and he did not let go of her hand, and she did not pull it free. and neither of them acknowledged the thing they were both entirely aware of, that they were walking hand in hand through Malfoy Manor at midnight, like something out of a story that had no business being told about the two of them. He took her up, past the galleries with their watching portraits, past the long corridor where the wallpaper still bore the ghost rectangles of paintings sold to pay reparations, up a narrow stair that turned and turned until the grandeur fell away and the house grew close and small and honest again. She was breathing a little quicker behind him. He could feel it through their joined hands, the faint catch of exertion or nerves, and he found he was cataloguing it, storing it, greedy for the data of her, the way he'd once been greedy for her failures. At the top was a door he had not opened for anyone in 2 years. "This was mine," he said, "when I was a boy, before they gave me the good rooms downstairs, before I was old enough to be useful, and they moved me nearer the drawing room to keep an eye on what they were making of me." He put his free hand on the latch. "I came back up here to hide, all through the war, when the house was when it was full. I'd come up here and shut the door and pretend the rest of it wasn't happening 2 floors down." His thumb moved on the cold iron. "No one knew. I never told anyone this room still meant anything. I'm telling you now because you laid your uncle on my kitchen table, and it seems the days decided we're not lying to each other. So, this is the trade. You gave me him. I'll give you this." He opened the door. It was a small room under the eaves, all sloped ceiling, and one round window like a ship's, and it should have been a boy's abandoned room. Dust and cobweb and the sad archaeology of a childhood. It was not. It was alive. Every surface held something growing. Pots and jars and cracked teacups crowded on every ledge, spilling green. Tendrils climbing strings he'd fixed to the beams. Small, determined leaves pressed against the round glass, reaching for a moon that wasn't there tonight. The air was warm and wet and smelled of soil and chlorophyll and something faintly sweet flowering in the dark. And the rain on the round window made the whole space feel like the inside of something living and submerged. He watched her face do the thing he'd brought her up here to make it do. He watched the last version of Draco Malfoy she'd carried into this house come apart. "You grow things," she said, barely above the sound of the rain. "I grow things." He let go of her hand at last, because he needed both of his to gesture at the ridiculous green sprawl of it, the secret he'd never confessed to a living soul. Muggle way, mostly. Seed and water and waiting. Magic makes it too easy. You say the word, and the thing blooms, and it's already dead inside. It never had to want to live. He pinched a dead leaf from a stem, an old unconscious habit. These have to want it. I have to want it for them. Every day, up here, for 2 years, I've come up and kept a room full of things alive because I couldn't. He stopped. His hand closed around the dead leaf, crushing it, and he watched his knuckles pale and made them open and let the fragment fall. Because I needed one place in the world where the thing I did was make something live instead of stand there while it died. The silence after that was enormous. He had not meant to say the last of it. It had come up out of him the way the truth kept doing tonight, unbidden. And now it hung in the green dark between them, the closest he had ever come, the closest he would let himself come to naming the drawing room, the wall, the standing there and doing nothing that had made a curse available to a man who'd never asked for magic. He did not say, "I'm sorry." He did not perform his guilt for her, did not offer up the melodrama of his own ruin for her to absolve. He simply stood in a room full of things he had refused to let die, and let her see that it was an answer to a question she'd never asked aloud. She understood. He watched her understand. She did not rush to comfort him, and he loved her for it. The word arrived in his mind exactly that stark, loved, and he flinched from it and let it stand, because there was no lying tonight, not even to himself. She did not comfort him. She walked slowly into the room instead, among the crowded green shelves, and she reached out and touched a leaf with one careful finger, the way you'd touch something sleeping, and when she spoke, it was not about him at all. "My uncle has a garden," she said. Has. I don't know which anymore." Her finger traced the leaf's edge. "Roses, mostly. Terrible ones. Half of them dead by August. He was a rubbish gardener. He just liked the doing of it." A small broken breath that was almost a laugh. He used to say a garden was the only argument he had with despair he ever reliably won. That you couldn't be entirely hopeless and still bother to plant a thing that wouldn't flower till spring. She turned and looked at him across the small, wet, warm dark, and her eyes were bright with something she wasn't letting fall. "You'd have liked him, I think, which is a horrible thing to say to a Malfoy, and I'm going to say it anyway. You'd have liked each other." It went into him like a blade sliding home between the ribs, clean and deep and almost painless in the first instant before the enormity of it registered. She had taken his ugliest confession, that he grew things because he could not stop the thing that mattered from dying, and she had answered it not with pity, but with kinship, had set her dying uncle down beside his living leaves, and found them made of the same stubborn refusal, and in doing so, she had done the one thing he had spent 2 years and one grotesque bargain trying to prevent. She had come close. She had come all the way close, past every wall, into the one room where he kept the last true thing about himself, and instead of using it against him, she had laid her own true thing down next to it, so that the two of them stood together in the green and the rain dark, and there was no distance left anywhere in the house to retreat into. "Granger," he said, and did not know what was going to follow it. "Don't." She shook her head, and the brightness in her eyes threatened to spill, and she blinked it fiercely back, and her hand came up, not to him, to her own collar, that same frantic small adjustment of a cuff that did not need adjusting, the tells she reached for when the ground moved under her. "Don't say something kind. I can't, if you're kind to me right now, in this room, with all these ridiculous living things, and my uncle dying across the county, I'm going to do something we'll both have to spend the rest of the night pretending didn't happen. So don't. Give me an order instead. Be awful. It's easier when you're awful." And there it was, laid bare between them, that the hostility had never been the truth of it, only the drug they'd both used to drown the other thing out. And now the drug had worn off in a room full of leaves, reaching for a hidden moon, and the other thing was standing up in both of them at once, undeniable, requiring an answer. He should have given her the order. He should have been awful the way she asked, the way that was easier, the way that would have let them both walk out of this room with the fiction intact. He was Draco Malfoy. Awfulness was the one fluency he could always fall back on. He opened his mouth to be cruel and save them both. "I don't want to be awful to you anymore," is what came out instead, low and wrecked and utterly without armor. That's the truth of it. That's the whole rotten truth of the entire day. I built the worst thing I could think of to keep you out of this house because I knew that if you ever got in this far, I'd stop being able to want you gone. And now you're standing in the one room I never let anyone into, telling me about a man I'll never meet who loved you before it was safe to. And His voice failed. He got it back. He would not let it fail. Not here. Not with her looking at him like that. "I can't give you an order, Granger. I've run out of orders. I only have one thing left in me tonight, and it isn't a command." The rain came down on the round window. Somewhere below them, the great house held its breath. And in the small green dark under the eaves, a bare foot's distance apart, neither of them yet daring to close it, they stood in the ruins of every wall they'd ever built against each other and waited to see who would be brave enough or foolish enough or honest enough to cross the last of the space that was left. Neither of them crossed it. That was the thing he would turn over afterward in the long, quiet hours, that they had stood a foot apart in a room full of living things with every wall down between them, and neither had moved because the space was no longer a barrier but a held note, and to break it too soon would have been to break the whole fragile architecture of the night. So they stood in it. They let it ring. And then, because a thing that intense cannot sustain itself without shattering, it was Hermione who stepped back, not away from him exactly, but sideways into the shelter of the ordinary, reaching again for a leaf to steady her hand. "You said 24 hours, she said, and her voice had gone deliberately even, a woman walking herself back from an edge. "You've spent, what, 4 of them, feeding me and showing me your secret garden and being alarmingly honest. This is the worst bargain I've ever heard of. You're supposed to be exacting a price. Instead, you keep giving me things. Maybe that's the price." He was grateful to her for the retreat. It let him find his own footing again, let the wreck of his voice reassemble into something that could hold a sentence. "Maybe the thing I want most from Hermione Granger is to be, for one day, someone she'd have let feed her without the war standing in the room." That's a very elaborate way to say you're lonely, Malfoy. It's a very Granger way to say it back to me, so I don't have to feel it. She almost smiled. He saw it try to happen and get overruled. "Come on," she said. "Show me the rest of it. Not the archive. I know, not yet. But you've clearly turned this mausoleum into something. I want to see what a Malfoy does with a house nobody's watching." So he showed her. And this, he understood later, was the middle of the night's slow work, the long, unhurried spending of hours that a lesser day would have skipped. The part where the change did not come in a single blow, but in the accumulation of small, unremarkable minutes, the way soil takes water, not all at once, but by patient absorption until the whole of it is altered through. He showed her the library he actually used. Not the grand performing library downstairs, but a smaller room he'd colonized, where the good chairs were worn to the shape of him, and books lay open face down across every surface. Muggle novels shelved shamelessly beside grimoires, a half-drunk cup of something long gone cold. He watched her read the spines the way another woman might read a diary, learning him in the titles, and when she pulled one down, a battered Muggle thing, a novel he'd read 3 times, and raised an eyebrow at him, he felt more naked than any order could have made him. "I didn't take you for a reader of Muggle heartbreak," she said. "I didn't take me for it either. Turns out you can't hate an entire people properly once you've cried at their books." He said it lightly and watched it land heavily, watched her understand he'd handed her something real inside the joke. She put the book back with a care that was its own kind of answer. They talked. That was the astonishing thing. The thing he'd have called a lie if anyone had described it to him a day earlier. They talked in the worn library, in the deep middle of the rain-drowned night, and the talk had edges, but the edges no longer drew blood. She argued with him. She argued with him about magical theory, and about the ministry, and about a book they'd both read, and read entirely differently. And she did not spare him, and he did not want her to, because being sparred with by Hermione Granger turned out to be the closest thing to being fully alive he had felt in 2 years. He gave as good as he got. He watched her enjoy that he gave as good as he got. Watched her come alive too, the grief on her not gone, but banked, the fierce, quick mind of her unfolding in the lamplight, and he thought, helplessly, that he could have listened to her be wrong about that book for the rest of his life. The hours came off the clock. Neither counted them. At some point, she'd curled sideways into the chair that was not his, feet tucked beneath her, his mother's wool still around her shoulders. And at some point, he'd stopped sitting across the room and moved to the floor near her chair, the way he used to sit in the kitchen as a boy, back against the shelves. And neither of them had marked the moment the distance closed to something companionable. The lamp guttered low. The rain had softened to a whisper, and in a lull, in one of the good silences they'd learned to share over the last hours, she looked down at him and asked the question he'd been waiting for all night without knowing it. "The drawing room," she said quietly. "Downstairs. You've walked me past it 3 times and neither of us has looked at it." She wasn't cruel about it. That was what let him bear it. "I was in that room, Malfoy, on that floor, and you were there. I've never asked you about it because I never thought I'd be in a position to. But I'm in your house, and you've shown me your secret leaves, and I think I need to hear you say something about it before whatever's happening tonight goes any further. Because it is going further. We both know it's going further. And I can't let it, not honestly, with that room unspoken between us." He did not answer quickly. He looked at his own hands in the low light. He could have performed it. He knew exactly the speech that would move her, the abject one, the ruined air aria, the practiced music of a man narrating his own damnation for the sympathy it bought. He had heard other Malfoys sing versions of it at trials, at parties, wherever contrition could be traded for advantage. He would rather have bitten through his own tongue. "I stood there," he said instead, flat, true. "You were on the floor and my aunt was... and I stood there, and I knew you, And I said I didn't. That's the thing. Not that I couldn't stop it. I was a boy, and there were a dozen wands in that room, and stopping it wasn't in my power, and I've made my peace with the parts that weren't in my power. It's the part that was. She asked me if it was you, and I looked right at you, and I said, I couldn't be sure. And it wasn't mercy. Granger, don't let me dress it up. It wasn't some noble little lie to protect you. I said it because I was a coward, because I didn't want to be the one who confirmed it, because I wanted the whole thing to not be my fault. And I've spent 2 years growing leaves in an attic trying to make that be true. His knuckles had gone white again, gripping his own wrist now, and he did not bother to make them stop. So, there's your answer. I didn't save you. I just refused to be the one who damned you, and then I called it enough, and it wasn't enough, and I know it wasn't. That's what's in that room. That's what I am. Now you know that too, and you can decide whether it's going any further, and I'll abide by whatever you land on, bargain or no bargain, because I've got no right to a single thing you haven't freely offered. The silence that followed had a flaw to it. It was not the ringing, suspended silence of the attic. It was the deep, still hush after a truth is finally set on the table, when everyone in the room is deciding what to do with the weight of it. She was quiet for a long time. He did not look up at her. He watched a bead of old rain track down the black window pane and thought that he had probably just ended it, and told himself that ending it honestly was worth more than continuing it on a lie, and did not fully believe himself. Then he felt her hand in his hair. She'd reached down from the chair without a word, and her fingers slid into his hair the way you'd touch a horse to calm it, or a child to wake it gently. And the sheer unexpected tenderness of it after everything he'd just confessed nearly undid him more thoroughly than any cruelty could have. He went absolutely still under her hand. He did not dare move. He was afraid that if he moved, she would remember who she was touching and stop. "You were 17, she said. Her fingers moved slowly. And terrified, and being made into something by people who should have protected you instead. I'm not going to tell you it was fine. It wasn't fine. It's one of the worst things that ever happened to me, and you were part of the room it happened in, and I'm not going to pretend either of those things away to make you feel better." Her hand paused, then resumed. "But you just told me the ugly truth of it instead of the flattering one, when the flattering one was right there, and I might even have believed it. Do you understand how rare that is? Do you understand that in 2 years of everyone in that ministry telling me exactly what I wanted to hear, you're the first person who's looked at me and chosen the truth over the version that would have served you?" A long breath, unsteady now. "I came here for a book, Malfoy. I did not come here to sit in an attic full of leaves and have my whole idea of you taken apart by a man on the floor telling me he was a coward at 17 and refusing to be forgiven for it. That wasn't the plan. That was not the plan at all." He turned his head then, just enough to look up at her, her hand still in his hair, both of them past the point where either could pretend this was still a bargain about a book. And the rain fell, and the lamp burned down to its last low gold, and above them, under the eaves, 100 living things reached in the dark for a light they trusted was coming, and he understood that the duel he'd started at the door had no winner because the only way either of them could lose now was to let go. He was the one who broke the moment, and he broke it deliberately because he had learned tonight that the unbearable ones had to be broken or they consumed everything. "You're exhausted," he said, low, still looking up at her from the floor. "You've been running on grief and stubbornness since before you got here. Your uncle isn't served by you collapsing in my library." He reached up, slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, and took the hand that had been in his hair and drew it gently down and held it a moment in both of his before he let it go. "I'm going to give you one more want tonight. Not a cruel one. Possibly the least cruel thing anyone's done for you in months. And then, if you still want it in the morning, we'll open the archive and you'll take what you came for, and none of the rest of this has to have happened. And if I do still want it in the morning, then we'll deal with the terrifying fact of that when the sun's up. One impossibility at a time, Granger." He rose, and his knees complained at the hours on the floor, and the ordinary human indignity of it made her almost smile happen again, and this time she let it. He offered his hand and pulled her up out of the chair, and she came up close, closer than the pull required, and for a heartbeat they stood chest to chest in the dying lamplight before he made himself step back and be the one with the plan. "Come," he said. "You're going to have a bath." She blinked. "I'm going to what?" "You walked through half a storm. You've been damp to the bone for 6 hours, and you're too proud to have said a word about it, and I have watched you shiver through 3 of my confessions." He was already moving, taking a candle from the shelf, and she was following before she decided to. "There's a room in this house my mother loved more than any other. She had it built when the rest of the manor felt too much like a tomb to breathe in. I keep it up. It's the one indulgence I've never given up. And you are going to let me draw you a proper bath in it, because it is the single most restorative thing this cursed house has to offer, and because I want—" He caught the word, held it, gave it to her anyway. "I want to do one thing for you tonight that isn't tangled up in what I owe you. That's the want. Let me." He did not look back to see her face. He didn't trust what asking her that had done to his own. The bathing room was at the end of a warm corridor, and when he opened the door and the candlelight went in ahead of them, he heard her breath change. His mother's one indulgence, a deep, sunken tub of pale-veined stone, wide enough to lie back in, set beneath a long window of leaded glass that in daylight threw the garden across the water in coloured pieces. Copper pipes his father had scorned as sentimental. Shelves of stoppered bottles gone soft-edged with age. And the smell of the place, even before he ran the water, the ghost of every oil and salt his mother had ever steeped there, roses and something greener beneath, sunk so deep into the old stone that the room itself exhaled it. He set the candle down and began, without asking again, to prepare it. He turned the taps and the water came thundering and steaming into the pale stone, and he moved along the shelf, choosing bottles with a familiarity that told her more than words could have. That he had done this, alone, more nights than he'd admit. That this warm, rose-scented room was another of his attic gardens, another place he came to keep something alive. He tipped rose water into the rising heat, and oil that beaded gold on the surface, and the steam took the scent and bloomed it through the room until the air itself felt like a thing you could sink into. "Malfoy." Her voice had gone careful. "This is... You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. That's rather the entire point of it." He didn't turn from the water. "I'll go. Obviously, I'll go. You'll have the room to yourself, you'll get in, and I'll be on the other side of that door with a wall between us like a gentleman, which I'm aware is a category you've never once had cause to file me under." He straightened and finally looked at her through the gathering steam. "But I set it up. The oils, the temperature, the roses. My mother's exact roses. I know them by touch now. That's mine to give, and I'm giving it. When you're in, and only when you're in, I'll come back to the doorway, and I'll do the one thing this room was made for, which she used to do for me when I was small and the world downstairs got to be too much." His jaw worked. "I'll wash your hair. Nothing else, nothing you don't want. But I'd like to be the one who does that for you tonight, Granger, and I've stopped being able to think of a reason not to ask." The steam moved between them. The water thundered down and slowed as he closed the taps to a trickle, and the room went suddenly quiet, but for the small settling sounds of it and the far whisper of the rain. She looked at him for a long, long moment. He had asked her the most exposing thing yet, more exposing than the confessions, because the confessions had cost only him, and this cost them both. This required her to be undefended in a room in the house of her nightmares, and to trust the boy who'd stood in the drawing room to keep to the doorway and keep to his word. He watched her weigh 2 years of every reason not to. He watched her weigh the whole architecture of caution a woman builds around herself and has every right to. And then he watched her set it down. "Go then," she said quietly. "Wait outside. I'll tell you when." He went. He pulled the door to behind him and stood in the warm corridor with his back against the wall and his heart going like the rain. And he listened to the small sounds of her on the other side of the wood, the rustle of clothing, the whisper of fabric, the careful displacement of water as she stepped down into the stone tub, a soft, caught breath at the heat of it. And he kept his eyes shut and did not let his imagination follow the sounds, because he had given his word, and because the trust she just handed him was the single most valuable thing he had ever been given, and he would sooner have died than spend it cheaply. "Malfoy." Her voice came muffled through the door, and it had changed. Some of the armor gone out of it, softened by the heat and the water and the surrender of finally being warm. "You can come in. The foam's ridiculous. You clearly don't do things by halves. You can't see anything. Come in." He opened the door. The room was a warm gold cloud. The candle doubled in the steam, and she was sunk to the collarbones, in water gone opaque with foam and oil, her hair dark with wet and coming loose from its knot, her eyes closed, her head tipped back against the pale stone rim. She had been right. He could see nothing but the line of her throat, the curve of her bare shoulder above the white foam, her face gone soft and unguarded in a way he had never once seen it, the way a face goes when its owner has decided against all sense to be safe. The sight of her like that, trusting, warm, undefended in his mother's roses, struck him somewhere he had no armor left over, and he had to stand still in the doorway for a moment and simply survive it. "You kept your eyes shut in the corridor," she said, without opening hers. "I could hear you not looking. That's the strangest compliment I've ever received. Don't get used to me having principles. It's exhausting, and I can't sustain it." He crossed to the head of the tub and knelt on the warm stone behind her, out of her sightline, where a person could receive tenderness without the unbearable intimacy of being watched receiving it. "Tip your head back, into my hands. I've got you." And she did. She tipped her head back off the stone rim and into his waiting hands, the full, trusting weight of it, her wet hair spilling cool and heavy over his fingers, and he cupped the back of her skull the way you'd hold something you'd been told your whole life you'd only ever break. And he understood, kneeling there in the rose steam with Hermione Granger's head resting in his two hands and her pulse visible in her throat, and her eyes closed in something that was no longer the armor of the day, but its opposite, that he was standing at the exact center of the most dangerous and most defenseless hour of his entire life, and that he did not, for once, want to run from it. He poured warm water over her hair. He did it with a cup his mother had left on the ledge, drawing it slow from the bath and letting it fall in a sheet through the dark length of it. And he watched the water track down and darken every strand, watched her breath deepen at the heat of it, and something in him that had been clenched for 2 straight years began, by increments, to unfist. He worked the rose oil through with both hands, and her hair came alive under his fingers, heavy and slick and warm. And he took his time because there was no reason on earth to hurry, and every reason to make it last. She made a sound, low, involuntary, a small, helpless exhale as his fingers found the tension knotted at the base of her skull and pressed it loose. And the sound went through him like current through wet ground, and he had to close his eyes and breathe once, carefully, before he trusted his hands again. "I retract," she murmured, "every unkind thing I have ever said about the Malfoys' priorities. A room built solely for this. Your ancestors were monsters, but they understood something. My mother built it. The ancestors would have called it soft." He drew another cup of water through her hair, slow. "She was the softest thing this house ever produced, and they spent 30 years trying to file it off her. They didn't manage. It's the one war anyone in my family ever won worth winning." His thumbs moved in slow circles at her temples, and she went boneless under them. "I think about that she kept one warm room in a cold house, and it was enough to raise a whole other person in me they didn't get to see. I keep this room lit for her, and for whoever the person is that she raised on the nights I can still find him." "He's here tonight," Hermione said quietly. "For what it's worth. I've met him. I quite like him. He grows leaves and cries at Muggle novels and washes the hair of women who came to blackmail him." A pause. "It's a shame he spent so long letting everyone think he was someone else." He didn't answer that. He couldn't. He gathered the mass of her wet hair in both hands instead and drew the last of the oil through to the ends, and then he let it go. Let it spread dark across the water's surface, and he should have stopped there. The task was done. Clean. Complete. He had kept to the doorway of his word in every sense. He had touched her only where he'd said he would, given her only the tenderness he'd promised. The honourable thing, the thing his word demanded, was to rise now and leave her to the warm water and go stand in the corridor and let the hour cool. He did not rise. He stayed kneeling at the head of the tub, and his hands, of their own reckless accord, came to rest on her shoulders, where they rose bare and warm above the foam, and he did not knead or stroke. He simply let them rest there, palm to skin, the weight of them an admission he had no words brave enough to make aloud. He felt her go still under his hands, not the boneless stillness of a moment before, a new stillness, alert, aware, the stillness of a woman who has felt the nature of a touch change and is deciding in real time what she wants to do about it. Malfoy. Barely a sound. I know. His own voice had gone to almost nothing. I know. I'll take them away. Tell me to take them away. She didn't tell him to take them away. The rain came down on the leaded glass. The candle guttered and steadied. And in the ringing silence where her order should have been, he felt her lean back, just slightly, just enough, the smallest pressure of her shoulders into his hands, the smallest possible answer, an inch that meant everything. He leaned down. He couldn't not. He brought his face down beside hers, into the warm, wet cloud of her rose-drenched hair, until his mouth was at the shell of her ear, and his breath stirred the damp curls there, and he felt her shiver run through both of them like a single body. This isn't the bargain, he breathed. The words came out ruined. I want to be clear about that, here, now, before either of us does anything we can't put back. This isn't 24 hours of doing what I want. I gave that up hours ago. I gave it up in the attic. Whatever this is, it isn't me collecting a debt. Tell me you understand that. Tell me you know the difference. I know the difference. Her voice was unsteady and certain both at once. She turned her head, slow in his hands, until her face was a breath from his, until he could see the wet dark of her lashes and the pulse going wild in her throat, and the fact that her eyes were open now and fixed on his mouth. I've known the difference for hours, Malfoy. That's the whole terrifying problem. They stopped there, a millimetre apart, less. He could feel the warmth of her breath break against his lips, could feel the heat coming off her wet skin, could feel his own heart trying to leave his body, and neither of them closed it, because closing it was the last irrevocable thing, the door that only opened one way, and both of them understood with total clarity that the next fraction of an inch could not be taken back and would remake everything. And it was there, suspended in that final unbearable space, that his own conscience made one last desperate lunge for the exit. Because he was Draco Malfoy, and he did not get to have this. And some old brutal voice that had run him for years reared up to remind him of exactly that. This can't be what I want, he whispered. And it came out anguished, torn, half plea and half confession, the last defense of a man who could not let himself believe he was allowed the thing that was a hair's breadth from his mouth. Do you understand? A day where I do whatever I want. This can't be it. It can't be mine. I don't get to want you and call it a wish I'm owed. That would make it the ugliest thing in this whole ugly house, and I won't. I won't let it be that. I won't have you, because a bargain said I could. Then don't. Her hand came up out of the water, warm and wet, and touched his jaw, and turned his face the last necessary degree toward hers. Don't have me, because of the bargain. The bargain's dead. You killed it in the attic. You said so yourself." Her thumb moved along the line of his cheek, and he shut his eyes and shook under it. "So, it isn't your wish, Draco. Fine, I'll give you that. It doesn't have to be your wish." Her voice dropped to almost nothing, and the whole night narrowed to the warmth of her breath and the wet press of her fingers and the 4 words she said next. "Let it be mine." And that was the thing that broke him. Not the touch, not the nearness, not the roses or the candlelight, or the 2 years of engineered distance finally spending itself all at once. But that she took the one thing he could not permit himself to want, and simply lifted it out of his hands and claimed it as her own, so that he no longer had to be the one who reached, so that the whole crushing question of whether he deserved it dissolved because she had made it hers to give. He made a sound he had never made before, low in his chest, half her name and half surrender, and he closed the millimeter. He kissed her. He kissed her. And it was nothing like anything either of them had armed against, because there was no hostility left in it to convert, no war to lose in the losing. It was slow and it was drenched, her mouth warm and open under his, and tasting of steam and roses and salt, where a tear had finally slipped loose without either of them naming it. And his hands slid from her shoulders up into her wet hair to cradle her head, as though she were the last living thing in a house full of ghosts. And she turned in the water and rose to him, and the whole warm rose-gold room seemed to lean in around them, and the rain came down and down and down on the old leaded glass. And for the length of that kiss, neither Draco Malfoy nor Hermione Granger was anything at all but 2 people who had finally, after years of drowning it, let the thing beneath the hostility come up for air. She broke it only to breathe, her forehead falling against his, both of them shaking. "Say my name again," she whispered. "The way you did just now. Not Granger. The other one. Hermione." It came out of him like something set free. "Hermione." And he kissed her again, deeper this time, and her wet arms came up around his neck and drew him down toward the warm water and the roses and the candlelight. And the last coherent thought he had before the world narrowed entirely to her was that he had spent the whole day terrified of being the one who lost the duel of self-control, and that he had been an absolute fool, because this, her name in his mouth and her arms around his neck, and the honest wanting of her with nothing owed and nothing owing, this was the only thing he had ever won in his life worth the name. Afterward, there was only the quiet. Not the bristling quiet of the doorstep, nor the ringing, suspended hush of the attic, but a third thing neither of them had a name for. The deep, spent stillness that comes when 2 people have stopped defending themselves against each other, and there is simply nothing left to guard. The candle had burned low into its own soft pool. The water had cooled to the temperature of skin, and they lay tangled and warm in the pale stone tub, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her, his chin resting in the wet dark of her hair, both of them breathing slow, the rain coming down gentler now on the leaded glass, as though even the storm had finally exhausted itself. He had not let go of her. He was aware that he was holding her too tightly and could not make himself loosen his grip, and she had not asked him to. One of her hands rested over his forearm where it crossed her, her thumb moving in a slow, absent circle against his skin, and he felt each pass of it as though it were the only proof he had that any of this was real. Neither spoke for a long time. He was afraid to. He had lived his whole life knowing that the good moments in the manor were the ones you broke by naming them, and some old superstition warned him that if he said a single word, the room would remember whose son he was and take it all back. It was she who broke it, and she broke it gently. "I keep waiting to regret it," she said. Her voice was soft and unhurried, drifting up through the steam. "That's the honest thing. I keep waiting for the part of me that spent 2 years being sensible to sit up and be appalled, to remind me whose house I'm in, whose arms these are." Her thumb kept moving on his skin. "And it's not saying anything, Draco. It's completely silent. I don't think it has anything to say. I think it agrees with the rest of me, and I don't know what to do with a version of myself that agrees with the rest of me about you. Give it time." His voice came rough against her hair. "The appalled part usually just runs late. It'll arrive in the morning, horrified, full of excellent arguments, and you'll listen to it, and it'll be right about all of them, and it still won't change anything, because none of the excellent arguments were ever the point." "No," she agreed. "They weren't." The rain filled a while. "You didn't take what you came for," he said. He needed to say it. It had been sitting in him through everything, and now, in the honesty of the cooling water, it demanded air. "The archive. You came here for it. You walked through a storm and blackmailed a Malfoy, and let me feed you blind and trusted me at your back in a bath. All of it for that. And I've spent the whole night giving you everything except the one thing you actually came for. I want you to know I noticed that about myself. I want you to know I noticed I was doing it." She went still against him. "Why?" she said. "Why haven't you just given it to me? You said the bargain's dead. You've clearly already decided you're going to open it. So why the theatre? Why make me wait?" He was quiet for a moment, arranging the truth into something he could say aloud. "Because the moment I open that archive," he said slowly, "you have what you came for, and there is no reason left in the world for you to be in this house. And I—" His arms tightened around her without his permission. "I have spent 2 years making certain no one had a reason to stay, and tonight, for the first time, I found myself doing the opposite. And I didn't recognize myself doing it, and I'm ashamed of it, because your uncle is dying across the county, and I let a single selfish hour of not wanting you to leave come between him and the thing that might save him." His jaw worked against her hair. "That's the ugly truth of the theatre, Hermione. I wasn't testing you. I was stalling. I was a coward about it the same way I've been a coward about everything that ever mattered, and your uncle paid the interest on my cowardice by the hour. So no more theatre. Get out of the water. Dry off. I'm going to open the archive tonight, now, and you're going to have what you came for, and I'm never going to make a dying man wait on my feelings again." He felt the change goes through her. Not softness, something fiercer. And she turned in his arms, water sheeting off her, until she was facing him in the low light, with her wet hair streaming and her eyes blazing with something that was neither anger nor gratitude, but a kind of ferocious tenderness he did not know what to do with. "Now you listen to me," she said, and there was steel back in her voice, the steel he'd sparred with all night. and he realized he'd missed it in the softness and was glad of it back. You are going to stop that. Right now. You do not get to take the best night either of us has had in years and turn it into one more crime to indict yourself for. I have watched you do it all night. Every kind thing you did, you found a way to make it a debt you owed. Every tenderness you turned into evidence against yourself. She took his face in both her wet hands and held it so he could not look away. You didn't let him die. You're not letting him die. You are going to open that archive tonight, and we are going to save him together. And the hour you spent washing my hair does not go on the ledger against a man's life, because life is not that stingy, Draco. It is not a bargain where every good thing must be paid for with a worse one. Some things you just get. Do you understand me? Some things you're just allowed. He stared at her. The water dripped from her jaw. The candle guttered. I don't know how to believe that, he said. It was the barest, truest thing he had. Then borrow mine, she said. Believe it, because I do. Believe it on credit until you can afford it yourself. And she leaned in and kissed him again, brief and fierce. A kiss like a decision, and then she pulled back and was all brisk purpose, a woman with a life to save. Now, get me a towel, get yourself decent, and take me to that archive. My uncle has waited 2 years for a cure, and about 4 hours for the two of us to sort ourselves out, and I'd like to keep the second number from getting any larger. So they rose from the cold roses, and he wrapped her in the great soft towels his mother had loved, and they dressed in the warm corridor with the ordinary fumbling shyness of two people who had just crossed an ocean and now had to remember how buttons worked. And he found himself laughing, actually laughing, low and disbelieving, when she scowled at her own damp clothes, and he summoned her one of his shirts instead, and she put it on, drowning in it, and looked at him with her wet hair and her fierce eyes, and his own shirt hanging off her shoulder, and he thought his chest might not survive the sight. He led her down through the sleeping house, down past the drawing room she no longer flinched from because they had said the truth of it aloud, and set it down the narrow stair to the west wing and the black door that answered only to Malfoy blood. He pressed his palm to it. He felt the old wards read him, read the name, the line, the whole freighted inheritance of it. And for the first time in his life, he did not feel the weight of that name as a sentence, because he was using it, finally, to open a door that would save a good man's life. And there was a rightness to that which went some small way toward the thing she'd told him to believe on credit. The door sighed open on the smell of old parchment and cold stone and centuries of hoarded knowledge, and he turned to her in the dark of it and held out his hand, the same gesture he'd made in the kitchen a lifetime ago, palm up, open, an offering and not a command. Come on then, he said softly. Let's go save your uncle. And in the morning... He stopped, and something almost like hope, an emotion so unfamiliar to him it was nearly painful, moved across his face in the dark. In the morning, if you'll let me, I'd like to make you breakfast. Anything you want. Because whatever we untangle in this room tonight, there's still a bargain that says I owe you a day, and I've decided I'm going to keep it after all. Only, I'm going to keep it backward. 24 hours where you tell me what you want, and I do it, gladly, for the pleasure of watching you get one single thing you don't have to fight the whole world for." She took his hand in the dark of the archive doorway, and this time there was no hesitation in it at all. And she stepped through into the cold and the parchment smell beside him, and the wards read the two of them crossing the threshold together and did not object. They worked until dawn. The archive was colder than the rest of the house and older than any of it. A long, low vault of black shelves where the Malfoys had hoarded the knowledge too dangerous or too shameful to keep upstairs. And Draco moved through it as a man moves through his own guilt, knowing exactly where everything is, hating that he knows. He pulled down volumes bound in things he did not let her look at too closely, and she did not ask, because there are questions whose answers help no one, and she had learned over the impossible span of a single night, which those were. They found it near the grey hour before sunrise, a working recorded in the cramped hand of some Malfoy 3 centuries dead, a slow curse of exactly the shape her uncle carried, and beneath it, because the Malfoys had always been careful to record the leash as well as the beast, the unmaking of it. He watched her read it. He watched her lips move over the counter-curse, watched her mind take hold of it and turn it and test it the way she'd tested every argument she'd thrown at him all night. And he watched the exact moment she knew it would work, because her hand came up to her mouth and pressed there, and her eyes filled, and she did not cry so much as stand very still and let 2 years of held breath go out of her at once. "It's real," she whispered. "Draco, this is it. This is actually it. This unmakes it. I can take this to St. Mungo's and they can—" Her voice cracked clean through. "He's going to live. He's going to live." And he did the only thing there was to do, which was cross the cold stone floor and gather her in against him and hold her while the enormity of it went through her. Her face pressed to his chest, her hands fisted in his shirt, and he felt her shake and did not tell her to stop, because some things you have to let a person feel all the way to the bottom of. And this was one, and he had spent his whole life being taught to swallow exactly this kind of feeling, and he was done being that man. He raised you to believe in more than the world admitted was there, he said quietly into her hair. It seems only right the more than was there is what saves him. He'd like that, I think. The man who told a frightened child the world was bigger than they'd been told, saved by the biggest, oldest, strangest corner of it. He tightened his arms. "Go to him, as soon as it's light. Don't wait on me. Don't wait on anything. Don't let a single one of these dark books make you doubt for 1 second that you're allowed to have this. You saved him, Hermione. You walked through a storm and into your own worst house, and you saved him. Let it be that simple. For once, let a good thing be simple." She looked up at him, wet-faced and luminous in the grey dawn light beginning to seep through the high slit windows, and something passed between them that needed no words, and she reached up and pressed her palm flat to his cheek, and he leaned into it, and for a long moment they simply stood there in the vault of everything his family had ever hidden, holding on. "Come with me," she said. He went still. "To St. Mungo's. Later, when it's done, when he's on the mend and awake and himself." Her thumb moved along his cheekbone. come and meet him. The gardener who wins his arguments with despair. I want him to meet the man who grows leaves in an attic and washes the hair of women who blackmail him. I think, her voice wavered and steadied, I think you too would win a great many arguments with despair together. And I think you've spent long enough believing you were only allowed to be met by people who already knew you when you were at your worst. I'd like you to be met by someone who only ever gets to know the person you actually are. He could not speak for a moment. The offer was so far beyond anything he had let himself imagine being offered that he had no architecture in him to receive it, to be introduced, to be shown. Not smuggled in the dark of a bargain, but brought into the light of a good man's sick room as someone worth a good woman's introduction. You'd have to be certain, he managed. Truly certain, Hermione. Because a man like me does not survive being shown the door twice. And if you bring me into the light and then change your mind when the appalled part of you finally shows up in the morning, full of its excellent arguments. The appalled part showed up an hour ago, she said, while you were pulling down that book. It arrived exactly on schedule, full of every excellent argument, whose house this is, and whose son you are, and how the sensible thing would be to take the counter-curse and my dignity, and walk out that door and never look back. She held his gaze steadily, and I listened to all of it, every argument, and then I looked at you crouched in the dark of the worst room in your terrible house, hunting through your own family's sins to save a muggle you'll never meet. And I told the appalled part of me it was welcome to leave, because it was wrong about the only thing that mattered. Her hand slid to the back of his neck. It was wrong about you. It's been wrong about you for a while. I've just been the last to notice. The sun came up as she said it. It came up grey at first, and then, as the storm rack finally tore and drifted eastward, gold, real gold, the first clean light the sky had offered in a full day. And it came slanting through the high-slit windows of the archive and fell across the two of them standing there in the ruins of every wall they had spent years building. And Draco Malfoy kissed Hermione Granger in the dawn light of the darkest room in his house, slow and certain and entirely without fear. And it was different from every kiss before it, because there was nothing left in either of them fighting it. No bargain, no war, no distance, no debt. Only two people who had drowned the truth for years, and finally, at first light, let it stand up and breathe. When they broke apart, she was smiling, and the smile went all the way up into her exhausted eyes, and he understood he would spend a great deal of the rest of his life trying to be the reason for that particular smile. Now, she said, you promised me something. Did I? You did. In the archive doorway. A bargain, kept backward. 24 hours where I tell you what I want, and you do it gladly. She stepped back and looked at him, his own shirt hanging off her shoulder, her hair dried into a wild dark cloud. The counter-curse that would save her uncle's life clutched in one triumphant fist. And she was, he thought, the single most extraordinary thing he had ever been permitted to stand this close to. So, here's the first thing I want. Before St. Mungo's, before the healers, before the appalled part of the world gets its say. Because it will, Draco, they all will, and we'll deal with every one of them together when the time comes. She lifted her chin. I want breakfast. You said anything I like. I've decided what I like. Name it, he said. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, the words came out of him, not as a weapon or a defense, but as an open door. Anything at all. It's yours. I want you to make me breakfast in that kitchen, she said, with your own flour-dusted hands at your mother's table in the one warm room in this cold house. And I want you to make enough for two, and I want you to sit down and eat it with me this time, on the same bench, close enough that I can feel you not looking away. And when we're done, we'll go and save my uncle, and then we'll come back and we'll figure out the rest of it, the world and the whispers and the years of undoing, one warm meal at a time. Her fierce, luminous, exhausted eyes held his. That's what I want, for the first of your 24 hours. That's the whole terrifying wish. Do you think you can manage it? And Draco Malfoy, who had opened his door at dusk to keep a woman out, who had named a monstrous price to frighten her off, who had built the highest, ugliest wall he owned, and dared her to climb it certain she never would, looked at Hermione Granger standing in the gold dawn light of his house, with his shirt on her shoulder, and a saved life in her hand, and a future in her eyes. He had never once let himself believe he'd be allowed, and he found that the thing rising in his chest was not fear and not guilt, and not the old brutal certainty that he did not deserve good things. It was joy, simple, undefended, unrationed joy, arriving late the way she'd said the appalled feelings always did, and just as certain and far more welcome. Yes, he said, and took her hand and led her up out of the dark and toward the warm kitchen and the risen sun and every ordinary morning that was going to come after this one. Yes, I think I can manage that. I think, for you, I can manage very nearly anything at all. And he made her breakfast in the one warm room, at his mother's table, with his own 2 hands, and he sat down beside her close enough to feel her not looking away. And outside the last of the rain dried from the fields, and somewhere across the county a dying man's cure sat folded in a war hero's pocket. And inside the cold old house that had learned in a single impossible night how to be warm all the way through, 2 people who had spent years at war finally, quietly, over eggs and stale bread and the whole unbargained future, began at last to be at peace.
Thank you for staying with this story until the end. I want to tell you something about it. When I wrote this, I kept thinking about one simple idea. Sometimes we build walls. We think the walls keep us safe, but often the walls just keep us alone. Draco did this. He named a cruel price. He wanted Hermione to run away. He was not really cruel. He was just afraid. There is one small moment I love. He kneels down. He puts a warm blanket over her cold knees. His hands stay there for 1 second. Neither of them breathes. He wanted to push her away. Instead, his hands were gentle. That was the first crack in the wall. That is the heart of this story for me. We often show the opposite of what we feel. We are cold because we are scared of being warm. So what is the moral? I think it is. You are allowed to have good things. You do not have to earn every kind moment with a painful one. Some things you just get. Some things you are just allowed. Hermione says this to him, and slowly he starts to believe her. I hope you let yourself believe it too. Thank you for listening. Take care of your heart.